You're about to discover why that gnawing emptiness inside you might be the most valuable thing you possess, and why the very system designed to help you could be stealing your soul. Right now, as you're watching this, millions of people are sitting in sterile offices. They're describing the same feeling you know too well, that hollow ache that no amount of Netflix, shopping, or social media can fill. The doctor nods, types something, hands them a prescription. Problem solved, right? Wrong. What if I told you that feeling isn't your enemy? What if that persistent whisper telling you something's wrong is actually your soul trying to save your life? Hit that like button if you've ever felt like you're sleepwalking through your own existence, because we're about to wake you up. Carl Jung, the revolutionary psychologist who dared to challenge everything we think we know about mental health, had a radical idea. He believed that what we call mental illness is often your psyche desperately trying to heal itself. It's not a malfunction, it's a message. But here's what nobody wants you to know. The moment you start listening to that message, you become dangerous to a system that profits from your numbness. Think about it. When did you last feel truly alive? Not just busy, not just distracted, but genuinely connected to your own existence. Can't remember. You're not alone, and you're definitely not broken. You see, Jung understood something that would make most therapists uncomfortable today. Your depression, your anxiety, your feeling of being trapped, these aren't diseases to be cured. They're symptoms of a life that's betraying your deepest nature. Let me paint you a picture. You wake up every morning to an alarm that jolts you from dreams you can barely remember. You rush through a routine that feels foreign to who you really are. You spend 8 hours in a job that slowly kills something inside you. You come home exhausted, scroll through your phone, and fall asleep wondering if this is all there is. Sound familiar? Comment below if this hits too close to home. Now here's where it gets interesting. Jung called this neurosis, but not the way you think. For him, neurosis wasn't a brain chemistry problem. It was a soul problem. It was what happens when you live a life that isn't yours. And the modern medical system, it's designed to get you functioning again. Not thriving, not awakening, just functioning. Back to the grind, back to the consumption, back to being a productive little cog in a machine that doesn't care if you ever feel truly alive. The pills they prescribe, they don't heal, they silence. They turn down the volume on the part of you that's screaming for freedom. And while you're chemically sedated, years of your precious life slip away like sand through your fingers. But what if that screaming part of you is the sanest thing about you? Jung discovered that most psychological suffering comes from one devastating reality. We're living someone else's life. We're following scripts written by parents who were following scripts written by their parents. We're chasing goals that aren't ours. We're maintaining relationships that drain our life force. We're trapped in careers that feel like slow suicide. And our soul knows it. Your anxiety isn't a disorder. It's your inner wisdom saying, this path is killing us. Your depression isn't a chemical imbalance. It's your spirit grieving the life you're not living. Your emptiness isn't a void to be filled with antidepressants. It's space waiting for your authentic self to finally come home. Share this video if you're ready to stop pretending everything's fine when it clearly isn't. Now, I know what you're thinking. But I can't just abandon everything. I have responsibilities, bills to pay, people depending on me. And Jung would say you're absolutely right. The journey to authentic living isn't about throwing your life away. It's about discovering who you really are underneath all the masks you've learned to wear. This process Jung called individuation. And it's not some new age nonsense. It's the most practical, life-changing work you'll ever do. Because once you understand who you really are, everything changes. Your choices change. Your relationships change. Even your suffering changes from pointless agony to meaningful transformation. But here's the catch. This journey requires something most people aren't willing to give. It requires you to face the parts of yourself you've been running from your entire life. the anger you've suppressed, the dreams you've abandoned, the truth about who you really are when nobody's watching. Jung called this your shadow, and until you make peace with it, it controls you from the darkness. Every self-sabotaging decision you make, every relationship that fails in the same way, every pattern you can't seem to break, that's your shadow pulling the strings while you think you're in control. The good news: your shadow isn't your enemy, it's your untapped power. It's the part of you that's been locked away, waiting to be integrated back into your life. And when that happens, you stop being a victim of your unconscious patterns and start becoming the conscious creator of your destiny. Subscribe to this channel if you're tired of being controlled by parts of yourself you don't even understand. But let's get brutally honest for a moment. Why are so many people suffering in a world that's supposedly more advanced than ever? We have technology that would seem like magic to our ancestors. We have access to information, entertainment, and opportunities beyond imagination. So why does it feel like we're drowning in emptiness? Jung saw this coming decades ago. He understood that we've created a culture that worships appearance but ignores essence, that rewards efficiency but destroys the soul. We've been conditioned from birth to believe that our worth comes from outside validation. From the job title on our business card, from the number in our bank account, from the likes on our social media posts. But here's what nobody tells you. When your sense of self depends on external approval, you're permanently vulnerable to emotional collapse. Because you can never control what others think of you. You can never guarantee success. You can never ensure that the world will give you what you think you need to feel worthy. And so you live in constant anxiety, always performing, always proving, always exhausted from trying to be someone you're not. This is why so many people feel empty despite having everything they thought they wanted. The promotion didn't fill the void. The relationship didn't complete them. The house, the car, the vacation, none of it touched that deep ache inside because none of it was connected to who they really are. Jung knew that humans need meaning more than they need pleasure, purpose more than possessions, direction more than distractions, and our culture offers everything except what we actually need. Comment below, what's one thing you've achieved that left you feeling surprisingly empty? Now, here's where this gets really interesting. Jung discovered that meaning doesn't come from the conscious mind. It doesn't come from setting goals or making plans or positive thinking. Meaning comes from the unconscious, from the deep, symbolic, mysterious part of your psyche that speaks in dreams and symptoms and sudden insights. Most people are terrified of their unconscious. They think it's just a dumping ground for traumatic memories and embarrassing thoughts. But Jung saw it as a goldmine, a source of wisdom, creativity, and guidance that's been with you since birth but that you've learned to ignore. Your unconscious knows who you really are. It knows what you really want. It knows what path would bring you alive. But it doesn't speak in words, it speaks in feelings, in dreams. In those moments when you suddenly know something without knowing how you know it. The problem is, we've been trained to ignore these messages, to dismiss intuition as unreliable, to trust only what can be measured and proven. And so we cut ourselves off from our deepest source of guidance, then wonder why we feel lost. But what if you started listening again? What if you paid attention to the dreams that wake you up at 3 a.m.? What if you noticed which activities make you feel energized and which ones drain your soul? What if you trusted those gut feelings that you've been trained to ignore? This is how you begin to reconnect with your unconscious. Not through therapy that tries to fix you, but through a relationship that honors the wisdom you already carry inside. Share this with someone who's been struggling to find their direction in life. But let's address the elephant in the room. If this path is so important, why don't more people take it? Why do so many remain stuck in lives that slowly kill their spirit? The answer is fear. Fear of change. Fear of judgment. Fear of losing the security of a life that may be meaningless but is at least familiar. Fear of discovering that everything they've built their identity around is a lie. And honestly, these fears are valid. The journey Jung described isn't a gentle self-improvement project. It's a complete dismantling and rebuilding of who you think you are. It requires you to question everything: your career, your relationships, your beliefs about what makes life worth living. Most people would rather suffer in familiar ways than risk the uncertainty of transformation. They'll take the antidepressant and try to make their prison more comfortable rather than break down the walls and discover what freedom feels like. But here's what they don't realize. The pain of staying the same eventually becomes greater than the pain of change. The soul has its limits. It will only tolerate betrayal for so long before it starts shutting down completely. You can see this in the people around you, the ones who seem to be going through the motions, who laugh at the right times but their eyes are dead, who achieve everything they're supposed to want but still feel empty inside, who medicate themselves with alcohol, shopping, binge-watching, anything to avoid the growing awareness that they're wasting their precious life. This is what Jung called living unconsciously, and it's the most common form of suffering in the modern world. Not dramatic trauma or obvious illness, but the quiet desperation of a life unlived. Like this video if you refuse to become another statistic of quiet desperation. So how do you break free? How do you start living consciously in a world designed to keep you asleep? Jung had a simple but radical suggestion. Stop running from your pain and start listening to it. Because your pain isn't random, it's intelligent. It's trying to tell you something about the gap between who you are and how you're living. That anxiety that hits you every Sunday night. It's not a disorder. It's your soul telling you that Monday morning represents everything that's wrong with your life. That depression that seems to come from nowhere. It's your psyche grieving the person you could be if you had the courage to change. Your symptoms are not your enemies. They're your messengers. And the more you silence them with medication or distraction, the louder they have to scream to get your attention. But when you start listening, something magical happens. The pain begins to transform from meaningless suffering into meaningful guidance. Your anxiety becomes a compass pointing away from what drains you and toward what energizes you. Your depression becomes a necessary death, the death of the false self you've been carrying around so your authentic self can finally be born. This is what Jung meant by healing, not the elimination of all discomfort, but the transformation of unconscious suffering into conscious growth. Comment below. What's one symptom you've been trying to silence that might actually be trying to guide you? Now, let me tell you something that might sound controversial. The reason most therapy doesn't work isn't because therapists are bad or because you're too damaged to heal. It's because the entire model is backwards. Most therapy tries to help you adapt to a sick system. It tries to make you functional in a culture that's fundamentally toxic to human flourishing. It medicates your natural response to an unnatural way of living. But Jung took a different approach. He didn't try to make people fit into society. He tried to help them discover who they really were so they could create a life that actually fit them. This meant looking at symptoms not as problems to be solved, but as intelligence to be decoded. It meant exploring the unconscious not as a source of pathology, but as a source of wisdom. It meant understanding that healing doesn't come from becoming normal, it comes from becoming whole. And wholeness includes everything: your light and your shadow, your strengths and your weaknesses, your socially acceptable desires and your forbidden impulses. Everything that's been split off and denied has to be welcomed back home. This is terrifying for most people because they've spent their whole lives trying to be good, trying to be acceptable, trying to be perfect. The idea of embracing their darkness feels dangerous. But Jung understood something profound. What you don't own, owns you. The parts of yourself you reject don't disappear, they go underground and control you from the shadows. They sabotage your relationships, They undermine your success. They keep you stuck in patterns you can't understand. But when you have the courage to face your shadow, to integrate the rejected parts of yourself, something incredible happens. You stop being at war with yourself. You reclaim the energy you've been using to maintain your masks. You become authentic, powerful, and free. Subscribe if you're ready to stop fighting yourself and start becoming whole. But here's where this gets really practical. How do you actually begin this journey? How do you start connecting with the unconscious wisdom that's been trying to guide you your whole life? Jung discovered that the unconscious speaks through symbols, dreams, and what he called synchronicities, those meaningful coincidences that seem too perfect to be random. Start paying attention to your dreams. Not because they predict the future, but because they reveal the present. They show you what your unconscious is processing, what it's trying to work through, what it wants you to understand. Notice what captures your attention. What books call to you? What movies move you to tears? What art makes you feel something you can't quite name? These aren't random attractions. They're your unconscious trying to show you something about yourself. Pay attention to your body. Where do you feel tension? What situations make your stomach clench? When do you feel energized versus drained? Your body is constantly giving you feedback about what aligns with your authentic self and what doesn't. Listen to your emotions without immediately trying to fix or change them. What are they telling you about your current situation? What needs aren't being met? What boundaries are being violated? What dreams are being ignored? Start questioning everything you've accepted as true about yourself and your life. Whose voice is in your head telling you what you should want? Whose approval are you seeking? Whose definition of success are you trying to live up to? Comment below with one thing you've always accepted as true about yourself that you're now questioning. This process isn't comfortable. In fact, comfort is often the enemy of growth. Jung understood that we only change when the pain of staying the same becomes greater than the pain of transformation. But here's what most people don't realize. The pain of transformation is temporary. It's the labor pains of birthing your authentic self. It hurts, but it's productive pain. It's creating something beautiful. The pain of staying unconscious, on the other hand, is permanent. It's the slow, grinding agony of a life unlived. And it only gets worse with time as the gap between who you are and how you're living grows wider and wider. Most people choose the familiar pain over the transformational pain because they don't understand this difference. They think suffering is just suffering, but Jung knew there were two kinds: the suffering that diminishes you and the suffering that enlarges you. The suffering that diminishes you is unconscious. It's repetitive. It doesn't lead anywhere. It's like being stuck in a loop, making the same mistakes, feeling the same emptiness, wondering why nothing ever changes. The suffering that enlarges you is conscious. It's purposeful. It's moving you toward something greater. It's the pain of growth, of expansion, of becoming more than you were before. Share this if you're ready to choose growth over comfort. Now, let's talk about something Jung discovered that will probably surprise you. He found that most people who came to him weren't suffering from mental illness. They were suffering from spiritual poverty. They had everything they thought they needed for happiness, but they had no sense of meaning, no connection to something larger than themselves. Jung called this the neurosis of the meaningless life, and he believed it was the defining psychological problem of the modern world. Think about it. How many people do you know who seem successful on paper but feel empty inside? How many have achieved their goals but wonder, is this all there is? How many are living lives that look perfect from the outside but feel hollow from the inside? This isn't because they're ungrateful or mentally ill. It's because human beings need more than pleasure and comfort to thrive. We need purpose. We need to feel that our existence matters. We need to be connected to something meaningful. But our culture has lost its connection to the transcendent. We've replaced meaning with materialism, purpose with productivity, sacred with secular, and wonder why people feel spiritually starved even in the midst of abundance. Jung understood that healing often requires reconnecting with this transcendent dimension, not necessarily through organized religion, but through whatever gives your life a sense of sacred purpose. Maybe it's art, maybe it's nature, maybe it's service to others, maybe it's the pursuit of truth or beauty or justice. Whatever it is, it has to be bigger than your personal comfort and success. Because when you're connected to something larger than yourself, everything changes. Your problems don't disappear, but they become meaningful. Your suffering doesn't end, but it serves a purpose. Your life doesn't become perfect, but it becomes significant. Comment below. What gives your life a sense of sacred purpose, or what do you think might? But here's where this gets challenging. Finding your purpose isn't something you can think your way into. It's not a logical process. It's not about analyzing your skills and interests and finding the perfect career match. Purpose emerges from the unconscious. It reveals itself through your deepest wounds and your greatest gifts, often in ways that surprise you. It requires you to trust something larger than your rational mind. This is why Jung placed so much emphasis on connecting with the unconscious, because that's where your authentic purpose lies. Not in your head, with all its conditioning and expectations, but in your depths, with its wisdom and knowing. Most people never find their purpose because they're looking in the wrong place. They're trying to figure it out with their minds instead of feeling into it with their souls. They're asking, what would be practical, instead of what would be meaningful. But when you start listening to your unconscious, when you start paying attention to what makes you feel most alive, when you start following the threads of your deepest curiosity and compassion, something begins to emerge. A sense of direction that feels both completely new and utterly familiar. This is your calling, not the career that would look good on LinkedIn, but the contribution that would make your life feel worthwhile. Not the path that would impress others, but the journey that would honor who you really are. Like this video if you're tired of living someone else's idea of success. Now, I need to be honest with you about something. This journey Jung described isn't just difficult, it's often lonely. Because as you start to change, as you start to live more authentically, you'll discover that not everyone in your life is going to support this transformation. Some people need you to stay the same because your growth threatens their comfort zone. Some relationships are built on your willingness to play a role that no longer fits. Some environments only work if you remain unconscious and compliant. This doesn't make these people evil, it makes them human. Change is threatening, even positive change. When you start living differently, it forces others to question their own choices. And not everyone is ready for that level of self-examination. You might lose some relationships as you become more authentic. You might have to leave some situations that can't accommodate who you're becoming. You might have to disappoint some people who were counting on you to stay exactly as you were. This is part of what Jung called the price of individuation. To become who you really are, you have to stop being who everyone else needs you to be. And that's not always popular, but here's what you gain in return. You gain yourself. You gain integrity. You gain the ability to form relationships based on who you really are instead of who you pretend to be. You gain work that feeds your soul instead of just paying your bills. You gain a life that makes sense to you, even if it doesn't make sense to anyone else. Share this with someone who's struggling to choose between authenticity and approval. And yes, there will be moments when you question whether it's worth it. When the pressure to go back to your old life becomes overwhelming. When the uncertainty of living authentically feels scarier than the certainty of living unconsciously. Jung called these dark nights of the soul, and he said they were not signs that you're going in the wrong direction. They're signs that you're going in exactly the right direction. They're the growing pains of transformation. Because here's what nobody tells you about personal growth. It doesn't feel good while it's happening. It feels like everything is falling apart, like you're losing your mind, like you don't know who you are anymore. And in a way, that's exactly what's happening. The person you thought you were is dying so the person you really are can be born. And like any birth, it's messy and painful and beautiful all at once. But if you can stay with the process, if you can trust that the discomfort is temporary while the transformation is permanent, something miraculous happens. You start to feel at home in your own skin. You start to trust your own judgment. You start to live from the inside out instead of the outside in. Comment below if you're in the middle of your own dark night of the soul and need some encouragement. Now, let me share something with you that Jung discovered that changed everything for him. He found that the people who successfully navigated this journey of individuation had one thing in common. They learned to see their lives as a story worth telling, not a perfect story. Not a story without pain or failure or confusion, but a meaningful story. A story where their struggles served a purpose, where their wounds became their wisdom, where their greatest challenges became their greatest gifts. This shift in perspective changes everything. When you see your life as a meaningful story instead of a random series of events, your suffering begins to make sense. Your mistakes become plot points in your growth. Your setbacks become setups for your comebacks. You stop being a victim of your circumstances and start being the author of your destiny. Not because you can control what happens to you, but because you can control what it means to you. This is what Jung meant by taking responsibility for your life. Not blaming yourself for everything that goes wrong, but claiming your power to decide what your experiences mean and how they shape you. When you live this way, everything becomes potential material for your growth. Every relationship teaches you something about love. Every job teaches you something about your values. Every loss teaches you something about what really matters. Your life stops being a series of disconnected experiences and starts being a coherent journey of becoming. And that journey, with all its twists and turns, becomes the most fascinating story you'll ever read. Like this video if you're ready to start seeing your life as a story worth telling. But here's the paradox Jung discovered. The more individual you become, the more universal you become. The more you discover what makes you uniquely you, the more you connect with what makes us all human. Because underneath all our differences, our cultures, our backgrounds, our circumstances, we're all facing the same fundamental challenges. We all struggle with meaning and purpose. We all deal with fear and uncertainty. We all long for connection and authenticity. When you do the work of individuation, when you face your shadows and integrate your wholeness, you don't become more separate from others. You become more capable of genuine intimacy, because you're no longer afraid of being seen. You're no longer hiding behind masks. You're no longer projecting your unlived life onto others. You become someone who can love authentically because you've learned to love yourself authentically. You become someone who can contribute meaningfully because you've discovered your unique gifts. You become someone who can face life's challenges with courage because you've learned to trust your inner wisdom. This is the ultimate goal of Jung's psychology, not to make you perfect, but to make you whole. Not to eliminate your struggles, but to transform them into wisdom. Not to give you a life without problems, but to give you the strength and insight to meet whatever life brings your way. Subscribe if you want to become someone who faces life with courage and authenticity. Now, as we near the end of this journey together, I want to ask you something important. What brought you to this video? What is it about Jung's message that resonates with you? What part of your life feels most disconnected from who you really are? Because the fact that you're here, the fact that you've stayed with this exploration, tells me something about you. It tells me you're not content with surface-level solutions. You're not satisfied with quick fixes or positive thinking or pretending everything's fine when it's not. You're someone who's willing to go deeper, to ask harder questions, to consider that maybe the problem isn't that you're broken, but that you've been living a life that breaks your spirit. And that willingness to look deeper, to question the assumptions everyone else accepts, to consider that there might be another way to live, that's the beginning of everything. That's where transformation starts, not with dramatic gestures or sudden revelations, but with the quiet courage to admit that something needs to change, with the humility to acknowledge that you don't have all the answers, with the faith that there's more to life than what you've been experiencing. Comment below, what's one thing about your current life that you're ready to admit isn't working? Jung spent his entire career studying people who made this journey from unconscious living to conscious living. And you know what he found? It's not a journey for the faint of heart. It's not for people who want easy answers or comfortable solutions, but it's also the most rewarding journey a human being can take. Because at the end of it, you get something that no amount of money or success or approval can buy. You get yourself, your authentic, integrated, whole self. You get to wake up every morning knowing that your life belongs to you, that your choices reflect your values, that your work serves your purpose, that your relationships honor who you really are. You get to face challenges not as a victim but as a warrior, to meet setbacks not as proof of your inadequacy but as opportunities for growth, to experience pain not as meaningless suffering but as the price of transformation. You get to live a life that makes sense to you, even when it doesn't make sense to anyone else. A life that feels authentic even when it's not perfect. A life that honors both your humanity and your divinity. This is what Jung offered the world. Not a cure for the human condition, but a way to make the human condition meaningful. Not a promise that life would be easy, but a guarantee that it could be significant. Share this video if you believe life is meant to be more than just survival and comfort. So here's my challenge to you. Stop waiting for permission to live authentically. Stop waiting for the perfect moment to make changes. Stop waiting for someone else to give you the answers that can only come from within. Start listening to that voice inside you that's been trying to get your attention. Start paying attention to what makes you feel alive versus what makes you feel dead inside. Start questioning the assumptions about success and happiness that you've never really examined. Start having conversations with your unconscious through dreams, through art, through meditation, through whatever practice helps you connect with the deeper currents of your psyche. Start seeing your symptoms not as problems to be fixed, but as intelligence to be decoded. Start understanding your pain not as evidence of your brokenness, but as guidance toward your wholeness. Start believing that you have something unique to contribute to this world, something that can only come through you living as authentically as possible, something that the world needs, even if you can't see how yet. This is your life we're talking about. Not a dress rehearsal, not a practice round. This is it. And every day you spend living unconsciously is a day you can't get back. But every day you spend moving toward consciousness, toward authenticity, toward wholeness, is a day that matters. A day that contributes to your own healing and the healing of the world. Because here's what Jung ultimately discovered. When you heal yourself, you heal more than yourself. When you live authentically, you give others permission to do the same. When you face your shadows and integrate your wholeness, you become a light in a world that desperately needs people who know who they are. Comment below with one commitment you're making to live more authentically starting today. The journey of individuation that Jung described isn't just personal development. It's not just self-improvement. It's a form of service to humanity. Because every person who chooses consciousness over unconsciousness, authenticity over conformity, wholeness over perfection, makes the world a little more sane. Every person who refuses to accept that life is just about working and consuming and dying makes it easier for others to imagine a different way of living. Every person who has the courage to live their truth, even when it's difficult, even when it's lonely, even when it's misunderstood, creates a pathway for others to follow. This is your invitation to become one of those people, to to join the ranks of those who refuse to waste their precious life, to become someone who chooses growth over comfort, truth over convenience, meaning over materialism. It won't be easy, but it will be worth it, because at the end of your life you won't regret the chances you took to become who you really are. You'll only regret the chances you didn't take. The time is now. The person is you. The choice is yours. What are you going to do with this one beautiful, difficult, meaningful life you've been given?